Hey everyone, I want to talk a bit about communication in Albion, specifically voice communication for group PvP content. The reason I thought about making this video is because someone PM'd me to ask if I was free for a 5v5 Crystal League match. I was free, but I'm not the best player, so often before I say yes I ask what role they need, what level we're aiming for. I could do any role in level 1, but would prefer to stick to some more comfortable roles for high levels. They needed a DPS for the level 3, I could only play crossbow for level 3s, they still accepted. Now, after the first match, one of them said, "Wow Warder, you're not bad, like at least you're talking." Now it may come off as bragging to tell you about a random guy that said I wasn't bad and kinda decent, and I kinda am bragging, but it started to make me think about how often I feel like people aren't communicating properly in PvP, and how many times I've lost because of it. So here is a video to send to your Crystal League Phil that didn't call us pierces. I think it will be the easiest if we start from the biggest kind of PvP, since every individual has less responsibility if it comes to communication. Of course you have the shot caller in ZVZ that calls out the macro, but the shot caller isn't clairvoyant, so you should call out stuff like flanks or Zergs getting in position. If these kinds of things are happening, you should definitely speak up and talk over your shot callers to try and inform of these things. Try to make sure you're loud enough so that the shot caller notices you, but not too loud that your allies' ears start bleeding. Give your information in a short and concise manner, so it is clear and doesn't take too much time. You're getting flanked from the northwest.
I'm cutting north, okay? Keep cutting north. Your defense is used to my south. Defense is south. Keep cutting north. I'm cutting back to there, okay?
Yo, your defense is tanks, I need northwest.
Defense, tanks on my west. You reach for the west of say. Tanks west. Hold this. Walking. I'm going into there.
No, not yet, don't die.
Into there.
In this example you can see that I called out the flank. Now Michael, the shot caller, didn't respond immediately, but he for sure heard it. But Warder, I'm lazy and I'm shy, why should I bother? First of all, it's a nice gesture to your shot caller and your guild. It increases your chances of not dying, and it might win you the fight and get a juicy kill fame. Any other stuff you can call out? Well, I would say this depends on your caller. I wouldn't dare to say anything if Syndic was my caller, but in my guild I would dare to call out my fallen resets if I'm one of the only healers left, or something. If it's something urgent or game changing in a way, you can call it out. Don't overdo it though, be short and concise, and only do this if your shot caller is fine with it. As a ZVZ scout or battle scout, you need to call out when you see a blob, what alliance tag they have, disarray level, and where they're heading. Check the item powers, and if they have quite a lot of people with exceptionally high, like 1600, 1700 IP, or exceptionally low, like 1250 or lower, you should call that out too, because it does have an impact. In ZVZs, I personally recommend to mute your microphone and either have a button to unmute or use push to talk to prevent you from making any noise unintentionally. Many of you have a cool gamer mount that has buttons on the side. I personally use one of them for push to talk, although I use my middle mouse button to mute/unmute my mic. Of course, this is all preference, do what you are comfortable with. If you want to learn more about communication for shot callers, look at my shot caller guide. Link is in the description. Next up, I want to talk about small scale ZVZ. With this I mean fights that you have about 10 to 25 people. Instead of having the easy to understand clump, clap and dip strategy, you have a more brawling playstyle. Here I feel like almost all roles have some sort of responsibility if it comes to communication. For example, if you're running a Blight or a Fallen, they should call out when they are getting pressured or getting out the reset. The reason mainly is that roughly at this scale, missing a reset might actually win or lose you the fight. In ZVZ this isn't as big of a deal because numbers, but now you need to start coordinating. About DPS, it depends what kind of comp you're running, but in both brawling comp and some sort of clap comp, you need to communicate on who you're currently targeting. If 10 DPS are dealing 200 damage on 10 targets, you make the enemy healer play whack-a-mole on easy mode. If 10 DPS are dealing 200 damage on one target, the healer is playing Elden Ring on crack and the enemy tank is smashing his R key to drop his Judicated armor. It seems trivial, but think about how many instances you've been in where DPS is doing their own thing, so it's not that trivial, apparently. If you have pierces, call out who you're piercing so you can line up with the burst DPS. If you're burst DPS, call out who is in range so the piercer doesn't pierce anyone out of range. At this level I often see tanks treating the fight as it's easy, and I agree that you should have the typical caller that does the macro. However, you should probably have another clump tank, like a second caller, that calls out where the clumps will be and when. Here you can see an example from the fleet. Thank you to Dread for letting me use the clip.
Alright, get ready, get ready. Can we turn on this already? Can you turn on this already? Get ready? 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's try to get some floppies here. Go deep, go deep, 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 deep. Didn't catch fuck all here. Wasted any pneumatic though? That's fine, that's fine. Guide towards hideout, guide towards hideout, guide towards hideout. Don't waste. Wait till Dread engage, wait till Dread engage. Like here on the front line, in the front line, in the front line, in the front line. Okay. Here's some man. Also a lot of damage. Back off east, back off southeast, back off southeast. Damn, well, fucked on, man.
You can hear how Dread is assisting in the calling. I personally would organize this level of group as follows. You have a macro shot caller that decides where to take fight, where to kite to, if you're even going to take the fight, if you're retreating, and so on. And a micro caller that's mostly there to make clumps and call out where the clump will be. Hierarchically, the macro caller's words are worth more than micro caller since he is a director in a way. Here's another example of how communication should be, in my opinion.
Gallows.
Yeah, do not go on the trip.
Check how far
Come helping a look for the gallows and purple.
Coming through channel.
Can we kill the mob? Kill the mob.
This mob.
Kill them up.
Don't clump up on the mob, please.
Yeah, I see.
Can I get the
I
name
don't know.
of the
Looking
gallows?
east. 3,
Name of the gallows?
2, 1. I'm looking east now. Look up here.
Huge gamma.
Breeze in the front.
Come back west, come back west, come back west, come back west, come back west.
Biggie.
Inside of us, inside of us,
Firewall?
inside of us.
Kill the hotch, kill the hotch. Nice. Watch out,
Reset in the front. Reset in the jury. East in the jury.
Backline, back.
Nice.
Julie up here.
Breeze in the back.
Pierce on all of them, pierce on all of them.
I'm gonna get the perma, I'm gonna check the perma.
Look at the green guy.
Yeah, we broke them.
The fucking gallows.
Be careful though.
I have a perma 1 HP up here.
Loot in the back. I'm looting.
Yo, we'll look for the bridles, hot pickle. Look for the bridles, okay?
Surgery.
They're rotating north.
Yeah.
Mountain.
Come up.
They dismounted.
Okay, come back, come down. Trios, come down.
Don't clap.
Yeah, just.
Our healer just. Oh, okay.
Come down.
They're gonna spread through this too, this is bad, yeah, come down.
Come east.
Can you mark us? Yeah, mark yourself someone.
Careful, Snape. Careful, brother.
Yeah.
They're walking east, they're walking
rotating.
east.
They're rocking. Oh.
Yeah. Come further east.
Demon Gen is on... What the fuck? Their mace is not on silence, yeah.
We got a mace behind.
They're
One
trying to flank. They're flanking.
Don't pay like too much attention on it.
Don't clump.
Don't pay too
They're
pay
walking,
attention.
they're walking.
They have a few on the east, two on...
Punish tank.
Yeah, punish front.
Look at the Kingmaker, look at the Kingmaker!
Gotta root it south.
We're in the back. Pierce.
Look at the
Breeze in the front.
First on the front. Big E.
Reset in the front.
We're starting back.
The back.
Yeah, we need jitties. Yeah, good. Breeze.
Starting the back one.
Jumping. Ooh, huge snare.
Look at the road!
They're all pierced.
Big wood. Sam, watch out.
Rattled in through.
You're fine.
Gotta stun
Reset here. On Sam.
Look at perma,
Huge gamma.
Over.
Yeah, Sarman, you're fine.
Running out. The healer.
Okay, I'm with you.
Breeze in the front.
Sam, roof front line.
Yeah, there's a perma east. Perma east.
Kill the front line.
Reset in the front.
Come on in 4.
Like if the perma.
Support players, you can just focus on calling out macro stuff, who's in need of help, who needs peels, what is an easy target to switch to, are you getting flanked. In general I would say supports don't need to talk that much. I already lightly touched on this, but healers you really need to call out your resets, with the exception being health. Make sure everyone knows big heals are happening. If you're holy, consider calling out your ward so your teammates don't dodge them. I think next up is instance content, so that means Hellgates and Crystals. I think the short description is that it's similar communication as open world PvP, but it's just more concentrated and intense communication. With this I mean the DPS should be basically narrating who they are hitting. Here's an example of when I played crossbow in a 5v5 match. Pay attention to how often and what I call, and how I also listen to the other DPS. Okay?
Yeah. Both
I'm gonna jump back.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, I'm gonna start ramping now.
I'm hitting
Tank used
Blade.
perch on me. Look at yours
Yeah,
and
look
bubbles.
the curse, look the curse.
I'm perched. I'm on healer.
Healer? Yeah. Pierce on the healer. Healer is pierced. I'm hitting
Fucking
healer.
kill you.
Yeah.
Healer? Oh, he's dead. He's dead.
Nice.
Just straight dead. Purge the bow. I purged the bow. At this scale, there is not a single person that shouldn't be talking, in my opinion, since every individual has some sort of ability that is vital to the team. I've also mentioned some specific things already that you should call. For healers, this is resets and holy orbs. For tanks, these are purges and peels. For DPS, these are burst damage and pierces. And in general, you should call out anti-heal abilities. If you're learning to do meaningful communication, I should advise to start in 5v5s, because communication will make or break the fights. Like, basically what I mean is that you will win or lose the fights with your communication, and since level 1 crystals are not full loot, it's not that super punishing. It also allows you to overdo your communication without much punishment. I think it's better to overdo communication and then tone it back a bit, than go from calling nothing and toning it up to call one thing. So what should every role in 5v5 call out? Start from tanks, you need to call out your Adjudicator armors. If you're on Ironclad, you need to call out when you're pushing people away and who you're looking to push away. You should also look at which targets are out of position and see how hard you can punish the healer. If the healer has no mana, you can need to call that out, since it allows your team to be more aggressive. Also pay attention to the enemy, their defenses. If the enemy crossbow doesn't have a cleric robe, you might be able to punish him. The melee should call out who he is targeting. If you're a glaive, you need to call out who you're flinging back or trying to hook. Let's say you play Ironclad glaive, you wouldn't be the first people to accidentally work against each other by swapping and flinging them back into their own team. If you're on axe, you should call out which targets have full bleed stacks. If you're on death givers, you should mainly listen to your RDPS and look if you can kill the target. Also call out your stacks. Don't forget to call out your Stalkerhood Pierce as well. If you're the RDPS, it heavily depends on what weapon you're on, what you should call, and how dominant you should be. Curse players must call out their pierces and who has a lot of dots on them. Dots are the damage over time stacks. They are the skulls. Fighter players must call out who they're targeting and who they are putting artillery fire on. Frost players have it a bit difficult, since you often change targets quite rapidly or need to reposition yourself regularly. As a Frost, I feel like it's fine to be a bit more vague on who you're hitting at the time. I'm hitting the front, for example, or I'm hitting the clavies is already a good way for your other DPS and melee to adjust. Crossbow players and bow players need to be the most dominant in the voice chat. They need to literally narrate their moves, in my opinion. Yeah, high level crystal players aren't communicating that much, but this field is the least punishing if it comes to other communication. Healers, call your resets and graveguard helmets. In general, in 5v5s you should call out if you're getting focused and if you need help. Your tank and healer can adjust themselves to peel and heal you. If you notice that you're getting bombed and pierced by a light crossbow, calling it out will give your team a second or two heads up, which can mean the difference between dying and living. Going back to edit this video and getting some feedback from a friend, I forgot to mention that DPS should be calling out cooldowns on big damage pierces so they can line up coordinated combos. Dot weapons generally can call out how well stacked enemies are, as this gives you overall tempo, while burst damage is focused more on priority targets and burst cooldowns. Another small thing is that in nearly all 5s or 10 sized content, there should be a quote-unquote main target caller so that you can always sync up. I mentioned before that a bow or a crossbow are always high communication, but usually if a crossbow calls a pierce, other DPS should all swap to that target. Similarly, in a glaive comp, the RDPS should always, almost always listen to who the glaive is flinging back. Back to my previous self. The best way to improve on the communication side of things is to watch recordings of the fights you just had. Try to look out of the others, their point of view, and see what they are doing and how they are reacting with the info they get. Do the same for you and see if you're on the same page. If you're not, that means one of two things. Either communication is not clear enough, or it's simply not enough, or the meaning of the communication is not clear. In the former, you should just talk more. In the latter, you should discuss with your team what the strategy is of the comp and how certain pieces of info influences the execution. To give a more concrete example, let's say you're playing Divecom and someone calls out that the frost is out of position. If your curse player pierces someone else, it means that either he doesn't understand that you need to hit the same target, or that he didn't hear it, or that the clear wasn't clear enough. I also want to stress that you shouldn't feel bad repeating yourself. There's a good reason when shot callers say the same thing 5 times in a row. It is worthless. I actually encourage it. So I think I said what I wanted to say. If you have any remarks or additions to what I said, feel free to drop a comment below. If you're interested in other videos in a similar style, check out my channel and consider subscribing. Hope to see you soon on YouTube or on the battlefield.